afternoon, North Penn staff and students, and welcome to Our View. I'm one of your anchors, Sanaa Buford, a junior here at North Penn High School. I'd like to introduce you to my fellow amazing anchors that we have for you here today.
Hey everyone, my name is Dominique Bethel, and I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm also a junior. We are so excited to share with you this year's Colors of Pride program entitled Our View. The purpose of this production is not only to share with you the variety of perspectives, but also open up opportunities to have conversations surrounding race and culture. Before we go any deeper, I'll introduce fellow anchors and introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, it's your favorite anchor, the man, the myth, the king, Keenan Washington.
I can't even.
No, really though. My name is Keenan Washington. We have quite a production in store for you, right Jordan?
Yeah, good afternoon, North Penn. My name is Jordan Stewart, but many of you may know me as Stewie. To answer your question, Keenan, yes. We have an amazing show from our very own North Penn's African American Awareness Club that highlights the topics of race and culture through multiple mediums, from live art to deeper topics such as the tragedy of MOVE that occurred in the year 1985, yet still affects the city of Philadelphia today. All in all, it will be an amazing show, and we're about to get started. Back to you, Dom.
We love to see it.
We sure do.
So Sanaa, what do you expect this afternoon?
I expect to see creativity in all forms, from different viewpoints of our peers, and of course to see our view. But enough said, let's get right into it. Take it away, Jordan.
Thank you, Sanaa. First up, we would like to introduce to you Samuela Adebowen, a senior at North Penn's High School who will be singing Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is also known as the Black National Anthem.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song. Sing a song. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you, Samuela. Your voice is so beautiful. Next up, we have story time. These stories are voices of our AAAC members who are going to share their experiences with social unrest that recently occurred during the pandemic. So without further ado, I give you We Are Not the Same.
To be honest, I refrained from watching it. I couldn't believe it. I remember sitting on the floor up against the couch, and I finally brought myself to watch it. I started crying, and I went into the bathroom, and I just looked at myself in the mirror. And I saw my dad, and I could just think how easily it could have been him. And after that, I sat with my dad, and I called him to see if he was all right, and he told me how he felt and how that had always been a fear of his. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
To be honest, when I found out about the murder of George Floyd, I didn't feel anything. Like, I had previously heard about the death of Ahmaud Arbery, and that situation had just been getting publicity at that specific time. And just a week after hearing about that, I hear about another death of yet another unarmed Black man. Wow. I didn't feel anything because it was already too much going on during the year. And it's just too much. I hadn't even finished coping with the discovery of Ahmad's death. And at that moment, it's like I could tell that things were only going to spiral downhill from that moment on. Unfortunately, I wasn't entirely off with that assumption or realization. So many more names and so many more stories of innocent Black individuals became hashtags because they lost their lives too. And Breonna Taylor is a huge one that came up. And there's just so many more. Like the list is endless. And that is very saddening and that is very draining. Honestly, at that moment though, I really was just so tired of hearing such news like that. And me lacking any feelings at the time of that discovery is simply because I was numb to all of it. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
I was at home in my room scrolling through Instagram. Then I scrolled upon a post made by Sean King. It was the murder of George Floyd. To be honest, at first I didn't know what I was watching. Here I was scrolling through photos of friends and ads, and then this gruesome video pops up. Then I tried to watch the video all the way through, but I couldn't. I couldn't watch it. I didn't have an outward reaction, but in my head I was questioning what had happened, and if it really had happened. There was no one word to describe how I felt, though I did feel upset. I think I felt more upset because I didn't know how to talk about it with anyone. I posted a nice looking picture of George Floyd living life, and I went on with the rest of my day. It's still puzzling to think about. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
When the whole George Floyd thing happened, I remember hearing about it and not going on any social media that was playing the story because it sounded like something I would not want to watch. I would say that I was not surprised at all by what happened, just appalled by the act of it. Then after watching the video, it hurt my heart, but I did not really know how to feel and grieve. I didn't know if I should be angry, sad, tired, maybe a combination of all three. I talked to my family about it because it was all over and they wanted to know what I thought about it. Then different protests started to break out and riots happened. I remember texting and calling my friends who lived in the city and seeing how they felt, if they were okay, if they were being safe. Being that a lot of my quote unquote friends are white and each had their own little things and how they felt about it, I had to know how my Black brothers and sisters were doing and their thoughts. Everything just felt so elevated because we were all indoors and now people had no choice but to acknowledge what was happening. I felt happy to see that people were engaging in protests and having links and supporting Black-owned businesses. But then I realized it would not last long because once people had something else to do or they could finally go back out, it would be back to how it was. So I saw hope for a small second. Then I realized this is not the first nor the last time. So the hope diminished. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
One day at my grandparents' house, when I was down there for dinner, I had gotten these news alerts on my phone. Now, at first, I didn't pay any attention to it because who really pays attention to their news alerts on their phone? So, and that's when I saw it on the news. A man killed by another man killed by the police for doing nothing. Another man who won't get to see his family ever again for nothing. And with everything going on with Trump in office at the time, and then COVID going around at the time, you would think this wouldn't happen. But cease to amaze me and everybody else, it still happens. I was left heartbroken. I was left distraught when I saw this on the news. It left my family in tears that day. It almost left me in tears to just imagine how many more times this is going to happen before we actually get a result. And now I have to imagine, how can I protect my family? How can I protect my brother who is still coming up in this world? And just to think about that hurts so much. But what can I do? Until we actually figure out a way to change, this will never not happen. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
When I first heard about what happened, I'd initially mixed this incident up with one with Eric Garner. A similar thing had happened where Garner was in a chokehold and telling police he couldn't breathe. So hearing about George Floyd, I was like, well, didn't this already happen? And then when I found out it was recent, I was extremely shocked. I often see videos of police restraining people in a way that's just completely unnecessary, and you can hear the person constantly saying that they're in pain or that they can't breathe. And to know that someone who is meant to protect and serve had their knee on a person's neck and disregard the fact they were saying I can't breathe is unacceptable. The most surprising thing for me was how everyone took a stand together and agreed as a country that something has to change. The Black Lives Matter movement really opened everyone's eyes to what Black people have to go through on a day-to-day basis and opened the conversation to oppression and police brutality. However, the most frustrating part for me was that people were trying to justify what happened. Saying that George Floyd was a criminal and used a counterfeit $20 bill doesn't change the fact that he was attacked and his life was taken. The situation has been living proof that things like this will continue to happen. A change needs to be made in order for Black people to feel safe in a place that preaches liberty and justice for all. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
When I heard about the murder of George Floyd, I remember I was on social media while my mother was watching the news. My friend sent me the video and I watched the whole thing, analyzing and reading the comments. My mother told me that the officer was kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and I saw the disappointment and disbelief in her. I sensed the anger and sadness from my whole family. Personally, for me, I was angry, but the emotion didn't come until 2 days later because I was numb. It took me back to when I was about 6 years old, hearing about Trayvon Martin. I was sad because he wasn't brought to justice, but it can't happen again, right? Yet, here I was again 9 years later, looking at the news and wondering how old I'll be until I see change. United as people, diverse in our experiences.
When George Floyd was killed, I was laying on my bed scrolling through my Instagram feed. When I saw it for the first time, I wasn't necessarily shocked, but it took me a moment to come to the realization. So I kept watching it and watching it and watching it, trying to understand it, trying to get the full story, trying to get the why. The image of him on the ground, knee on his neck, calling out for his mother will be forever ingrained in my mind. My parents, being retired cops, were horrified themselves and felt as though the whole situation could have been avoided. My mother even said that they were trained to use other tactics to avoid this same situation. The murder of George Floyd not only impacted my family, but the rest of the world. United as a people, diverse in our opinions.
The murder of George Floyd changed my family quite a lot. When we first heard and saw what happened, there were many tears shed and so much grief, it was almost suffocating. My parents were devastated that yet another Black child has to grow up without a parent, and both of them have directly experienced racism, so seeing yet another example of it taking someone's life was so disturbing for them. My brother and I have been subjected to some microaggressions, and we have known of other people who have lost their lives to racism and police brutality, but this was our first live experience with it, and it was such an unsettling shock. We've lived in the predominantly white suburbs for over 12 years, and although police brutality is a major issue that has been around for such a long time, we've almost been sheltered from it because of our location. The shooting of Michael Brown and the Ferguson riots happened when I was 9, and I understood parts of it, but I didn't understand the true severity of it all. Following George Floyd's murder, however, I found that my family and I started having more important discussions about race, police brutality, and racism. It's a shame that it took his murder to prompt these talks, but I'm glad that we've been able to educate each other on such serious issues and create a safe place for us all to share our feelings. United as a people, diverse in our experiences.
Wow, that was so moving. It is so powerful to see the different perspectives within our own school. I have to admit that I've had my own thoughts and preconceived notions about what it means to be a person of color during the pandemic, and I've learned that everyone else did too. Next up, we would like to showcase the artistic talent of our very own Alexis Charles. Alexis, that's so dope. Thank you for sharing your talent with us. Our high school has such amazing departments that highlight fine arts in categories such as art, music, theater, and many others. Course selection is here, people. So, if you are interested in any of these areas, be sure to talk to your school counselors and get those requests in. Back to you, Dominic.
Thank you, Keenan. We'll be right back, North Penn. Stay tuned for this public service announcement.
Breaking news. This just in. 35 years after the bombing of the MOVE organization in West Philadelphia. We are here to give you a rundown of what happened and why. We also have two very special guests. One is our very own Mr. Gilmer, and second is someone I know all too very well, my father, Mr. Keenan Washington.
The MOVE organization, founded by John Africa in 1972, was originally called the Christian Movement for Life. The group advocated for a radical form of green politics, reverting back to a hunter-gatherer society and animal rights. The followers changed their surname to Africa, giving tribute to their motherland. The conflict with the MOVE organization first started in 1978 when there was a dispute with MOVE, neighboring people, and the police. This ended in a shootout between the police and MOVE, leaving one police officer dead. 9 MOVE members were sentenced to a maximum of 100 years in prison for third-degree murder, though no one knows whose bullet shot the officer. Fast forward to 1985. Underneath Mayor W. Wilson Goode, there is still discord between MOVE and its surroundings. On May 13, 1985, on Osage Avenue, is when the tension increased. After deeming the MOVE a terrorist organization, the city wanted MOVE to evacuate their homes, but they refused. The police responded by releasing tear gas and many rounds of bullets. This standoff lasted almost all day. With no response, the police decided to release a bomb from a helicopter onto 6221 Osage Avenue. That's when the fire began. MOVE members were evacuating the building to get to safety, but they were being beaten and shot at as they were coming out. From what we know, the fire department was ordered to let the fire burn because there were still MOVE members in the building. These acts resulted in the death of 11 MOVE members, including its founder, John Africa, and 5 children. The enormity of the situation was the fire spreading. It didn't just spread to a few neighboring houses, it spread to 2 blocks. That's approximately 65 houses that were uninhabitable, leaving 250 residents homeless. In 1996, MOVE survivors filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Police Department. The survivors were given a $1.5 million settlement. Again, in 2005, other residents filed another civil lawsuit against the city and were awarded $12.83 million in damages. While survivors and other residents of West Philadelphia were given a hefty sum of money for the damages, the long-lasting effects of what happened on Mother's Day in 1985 still and will always stand strong for some. I had the opportunity to talk to 2 members of our community who reflected on those events that took place in May of 1985.
So as a kid, we felt like the MOVE were just a bunch of your neighbors that were just kind of weird, right? So they're your neighbors. They live down the street from you. They walk around butt naked in the neighborhood. They're selling watermelons on the street, and they are spouting all different type of, almost like a cultist type stuff. They had their own type of way of doing things. And as a kid, we just played with the kids. So like I would many times get in trouble for just playing with the quote unquote MOVE kids.
I read recently that they were a combination of flower power and black power, right? As a line I saw where, I didn't know they were into animal rights and being very green and equality for every living thing, not just among humans, but among animals and plants. And it was an interesting group of what their movement was about.
We also felt like they were a little hypocritical because at times the children looked malnourished because they believed in like back to nature, so they wouldn't eat certain things. But then me personally, I would know that they were lying because my dad had a local meat store called Barron's Meat Market on 60th Street, and they'd be buying food there and they'd eat it there, but then they wouldn't, like the kids wouldn't be eating it. So like then the neighbors would be sneaking food to the kids. It was all the way weird for us because it's like, yo, you're saying all this back to nature stuff, but in reality, like, you're not really about that life because some of y'all about that life, not all y'all about that life.
And then there was the other side of it with their advocacy for what they were believing in that neighborhood. They mounted a massive bullhorn on that roof and just basically preaching every day and screaming obscenities out this bullhorn in the neighborhood about their beliefs and what was going on.
It became now kind of like this house of people versus the block. Right, because like I said, it was clearly 2 different perspectives on how we lived life. And they boarded up the house. They became very much adversarial towards the neighbors. And they got on a bullhorn, and every day they would say stuff on a bullhorn. They're putting everybody on blast, right? And they were doing all of these very things that the neighbors didn't quite, were not fond of. And this went on for, I don't know how long, of them just airing people out on the bullhorn 24/7. I mean, this loud noise was ridiculous. And then on top of that, particular neighbors that they had extra beef with. So all the houses have like skylights, which I know in North Penn, most of the homes don't have that because our houses are built like this. But these houses, these flat roofs, a lot of time have a skylight where you can see outside from the bathroom, like to kind of vent out. And they would drop things into people's skylights, like dead cats, things like that, which was very scary to the neighbors, kind of like an intimidation tactic. And the neighbors would get armed, and it became, like I said, at that point, it became very aggressive. So then, like my grandma even had a gun that I just recently took off her hands because they now were afraid, because if people could drop stuff in your skylight, then it's like, can they drop in my house? Can they come in here? How bad can this get? So it became like a weird scenario where these people that were our neighbors and they had kids like us all of a sudden became the enemies of the entire community.
So there's a spot of it is, if you're living in that neighborhood, you kind of get, I really don't need, till 4 o'clock in the morning, a bullhorn blasting obscenities about something, right? So there is a level of the group not fitting what would work in a neighborhood. So the activism was a bit of terrorizing the neighborhood because it was constant. You know, a lot of people complain about kids that play basketball too late at night and it's just a ball bouncing. They call the cops because there's noise, or somebody's having a party and there's music that's too loud, so they call the police. But when you have that level, and then you add in some of the militism where they would carry weapons, and so it was threatening, right? So it's a weird mix of what that group was about that caused people to have fear and say, no more, they have to go. And I truly believe, you know, after the incident they had in 1978, where they were trying to evict the group, that when it came around to this time, the police were like, no, they're leaving.
I was here, so it was Mother's Day, 1985. I can't forget it. So we were preparing for a meal because it's my grandmother's house, and my mother at the time lived there. We got a notification from the police that we needed to evacuate because their intervention with the neighbors had escalated to a point of an issue, as kind of as they said it. They told us to go on the parkway and it should be resolved shortly.
And I remember that in 1985, I was 14 years old. So in the Philadelphia area, it was a big deal. But in that age, it was a national story, but it wasn't like a story like that would be today.
My mom was kind of, you know, she was kind of chill. Like I said, more so my grandma was the one most affected because it was her house.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the house she purchased. She was one of the few neighbors who had her house fully paid for. And she was the treasurer of the block, you know, the Block Cabin Association. So she's very much invested in the community and the block and the whole situation. And, you know, there was some issues prior to this stuff. So she was just kind of angst.
There are moments in your life that you remember as a news story, and that for sure was one of them. I'm pretty sure I was in my home. I don't remember, you know, exactly. I remember the event, and it was just so shocking to see this police activity, the barricading, the shooting, and then literally seeing the news footage of dropping a bomb on a home in Philadelphia.
So we were watching it in real time. So we originally were on the parkway until they started just pushing us away further. So as the ruckus became more and more, they kept pushing us further and further away from the ruckus.
All I had was whatever I would see on the news, right? There was no social media. There was no other discussion about this. There was a group of people whom the police felt as though they needed to leave those premises, and they weren't going to do that. My dad's a firefighter. My grandfather's a firefighter. So a lot of the adults that were in my life were firefighters. And one of the things that, you know, that happened out of that, besides the shootout and not knowing, you know, at the end of the day, and not knowing during the event if anyone had been killed, if someone had been shot, that they let the fire burn like all night and burn down like 60 some homes, and an entire block just completely wiped out. And again, you know, with the framing of it was, well, these are bad people, terrorists, and you couldn't risk firefighters' lives to put the fire out, right? And that was kind of the conversation that the adults around me were like, well, you know, they're firefighters. They're not in there. They're not supposed to be in a war zone where they're going to get shot at. So of course they can't get close to put the fire out. But, you know, years later, as you learn more as an adult about, you know, what actually happened that day, you know, the fire company had been dumping water to try to get people out of the building all day. Just fire hoses all day long dumping on the building to try to flood them out, to make it miserable, to say, okay, we give up. We've tear gassed the place. We're flooding the place. So, you know, I have what I remembered as a kid in the conversations was, you know, well, you know, there's bad people in the house. They won't leave. They're shooting at police officers and firefighters. So that fire has to burn. So what else is there to do? There's a film called a documentary, 40 Years a Prisoner. And in watching that, it was just so shocking to me, and how much that correlated to today and all the events that have been happening in recent months and in the last couple of years, and how shocking it is that I think most people accepted that was the outcome that should have happened.
Similar to how America responds to people of color at large, it never was fully addressed correctly at the time. And still, we were left as a community to a fractured neighborhood because of this. I think now, because many of the neighbors have moved or passed on, it's kind of dissipating, right? So even though Keenan has been at his house many times, he doesn't really know and have that feeling, but there's still a hurt here, right? So all of my friends that are about my age or younger or older, we all still kind of carry that trauma, right? That trauma of watching the police gun down people that look like us coming out of a burning building, right? So how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that, the first black mayor of Philadelphia, on his watch, this happens, right? How do you trust the police after that? How do you trust the news media after you see them interview your grandparents and family members, say one thing, but after editorial review, it's spun in a different light depending on which news station is telling the story?
I watched that documentary and I brought it up to a friend of mine who's a little bit younger and had no idea what I was talking about. None. And it blew me away that it was something that they just didn't know about. And for me and my friends, we all know about MOVE. You say it, we know exactly what we're talking about. But how it changed then, I don't know that it did, because I don't know that I had a view yet. I didn't think in those terms yet to really think about the inequality of the force applied to those people. As it was framed in the media or by politicians, it was bad people doing things, bad people, police came and took bad people out, and unfortunate things happened. And that was it. But recently, talking about these things of just looking at a brand new lens and going back and looking at the events of that, it just makes you sick all over again.
How do we recover, right? So there's so much hurt, so much pain. I would say a lot of people have forgotten that, we've passed on from it, but I don't think there's ever been a true reckoning and healing, because the wound continued to be open because it was never handled properly, right? So how they murdered those people was not handled properly. How they reconciled with that organization afterwards wasn't handled properly. How they reconciled with my grandmother, other neighbors on his block, wasn't handled properly. Even how Edwin Dell and John Street dealt with the situation during their terms wasn't handled properly. There's a continuous, hurt by the city in reference to this situation. And I think just in the last month or so, did this current city council acknowledge and apologize for the incident. Like 2021, they just acknowledging it. Like, come on. And it's just a hurtful thing to see my grandmother never fully get her life back. It really tore families apart. It tore the community apart. And things never went back to perfect again.
Yeah, I looked up before we had our interview here. What were the top 10 news stories of 1985? We didn't see that in there. And it's a pretty big story. And I think it'd be there now. I think it'd be there today. If this happened today and the way it happened, I think this would be of course, it'd be a wall-to-wall coverage from the moment it started to the moment it ended. And there'd be marches and walks and hashtags and postings and protests, and there'd be lots of things happening. But I feel like it was kind of forgotten. And I don't know if it's Philadelphia wanting to put that behind them. Philadelphia, whether it's City Hall, the residents, it was a shameful thing that happened. And MOVE became no longer a force at all to either keep that conversation going about who they are or what they did. It was a thing that happened. We burned down the block in Philadelphia. Lots of people went to jail. I that's what I feel, that it's forgotten and not so much gotten over it.
In our community, therapies are not a thing that we do well. Like, we don't do therapists well, especially we didn't back then. And while some services provided, not many of us took advantage of those things. And I think the level of trauma that we shared and experienced was, for many of us, was not dealt with properly. So we just picked up the pieces as we were. And then you had now this community where you have some neighbors who, from the outside looking in, is like, man, they have brand new houses. These guys are moving on. And then the rest of the neighborhood looks different. So now you have almost like this hateration from Addison and Pine Street. Like other people was like, I wish my house got burned down. Like, well, I wish I had a new house. Like, do you really? Like, you know what I mean? So you had that. So then, so then you have these kind of these little fights and bickering between us, kids and stuff where they felt like we were more, I guess, well off than some of them because of the things we had after the fire. I'm saddened by it a lot because when I think, like I said, I think about the people who lost their lives. I think about how, I remember thinking to myself, why are you still shooting at people that are coming out of a burning building? Right. So, like, at the time the fire is happening and you have women and small children, and you had some, militant men in there and stuff like that. But at the time the fire broke out, like, they were killing these people that were just trying to get out of a fire at that point. It was a bad situation going wrong, and they were still just gunning them down, like using very militaristic kind of forces. You can't forget it, right? So, like, it's still here, it's still visible. Up until about 10 years ago, the move would still come here and do like an anniversary thing and make sure we couldn't forget it, type of deal. And my grandmother, around every Mother's Day, she still kind of gets the chills because she remembers it. For me, it still affects me to this day. It affected how I view the police ever since. It affected my interactions when meeting Wilson Good. So Wilson Good is in my fraternity, so I've met him through fraternity stuff. Like, so it's like weird. So I see him at like functions and stuff, and I don't want to bang with the guys. I'm like, yo, you were the guy that like let my grandma house burn down. But then I listen to my grandma. She's like, yeah, it was bad on his watch, but he still did the best he could. My grandma messes with him, so I'm like, okay, then I'll mess with him then too. But like, it's weird because like as a kid, I just didn't like anybody associated with that situation. I didn't like him as the mayor. I didn't like the police. I didn't really respect authority. I really was highly skeptical of all news publications and media, and that still kind of is with me. And I try to work through that as I process things. Like, is this when I talk to Keenan or different things, my son, my wife, like, am I still processing stuff weirdly from this incident, or have I come fully through it? And I just know because of how I look at certain things that will never leave me. I don't think.
I do not have an answer for how to keep things from happening again. But every time it comes down to pressure points of saying, no more, we're tired, this has to change. And the only way to change it is force, which when you apply force, always bad things will happen.
I believe, teaching respondents how to de-escalate situations, how to properly communicate and speak to people, treating humans as humans, right? Not looking at everybody as a threat, not, fully assessing the situation and taking matters correctly. I mean, some of the stuff that happened, the atrocities, it's clear that, while it got out of hand, there were people in charge who allowed it but they let the fire burn, right? So, like, when they could have put the fire out, they let the fire burn. So that lets you know that people in positions of leadership need to have the good of all people in their hearts. And until we get to a place to where we fully, I guess, vet the intentions of people in these public service positions that are in police, that are in fire departments, of what their intentions are they here to serve the community, or are they here to use authority against the community, then we'll have these issues. So I think a lot of reform needs to happen as far as how our police state is used, right? Are they going to be public servants, or are they going to be a police force to keep us in line? So until we get more public servant type of policing, then we'll always have these militarized responses.
Purely amazing. Can you believe that this happened less than 2 hours away from us? Not too many people know about this, and it's been time we talk about it.
It was. I thought it was a matter that needed to be brought to light and be made aware of the large injustice that happened so close to home. I learned a lot from both gentlemen and their experiences.
Wow, I am truly speechless. Look how history has repeated itself when it comes to communities of people of color.
I can't even imagine going through all of that. I have no words. That taught me that bad things have been happening to the Black community all over, in places that we would never even suspect. We need to be aware of what is going on in the world and educate ourselves on the past and present so we can better our future.
Next up, we have our last portion. We have our very own anchor performing a poetic piece of spoken word. Give it up for Keenan Washington.
I am a Black man. He is a black man. Both born from the copper sun, our melanated skin can never be undone. Ironically, when we become one, we are shunned. I am a black man. He is a black man. I was born in the suburbs. He was born in the city. They see me as privileged and him as a pity. I am a black man. He is a black man. Same struggles, different spectrums. The same things that divide us deprives us of feeling complete, whole and worthy, leaving us in a repeated cycle, washed and spun into confusion, waiting to be stained again by the treatment of those who will never understand. I am a black man. He is a black man. The way we talk might not be the same, looking at the same picture, different frame. Code switching has become so ingrained, it's insane, going back and forth between one and another. Chameleon identity, am I me or my brother? I am a black man. He is a black man. You see the difference in how we dress and behave? I'm what they want me to be. Shaved, clean, wearing my suit and tie. I'm the token, the one that is invited to the table, so no need to change. Why can't he be happy about his curls, waves, locks, and braids, catching the rhythm with just a simple sway? He's deemed ghetto, a team that's used to enrage because he speaks from his diaphragm. Like our ancestor, he refuses to be caged. He's just being himself. Why the hell isn't that enough? I am a black man. He is a black man. Can't you see the similarities? Instead, you look at us as peculiarities. I am a black man, and so is he. We are black men, here to continue our legacy of greatness beyond what the eyes will ever see.
Kanan, that was beautiful. Can you please share with us what made you come up with that spoken word?
I wanted to highlight and bring awareness to a problem within not only the black community, but throughout society. We are not a monolith. There is no one way to be black. Our circumstances differ, and so do our perspectives.
I thought it showed the reality of what African American students face on a daily basis, and that everyone is different. No one should be put in a box.
You know, the pressures from society and social media can make black men feel as though they're either portrayed as two visions: a black man who speaks properly and is considered acceptable, or a black boy from the hood that has no future. But in reality, we should not be held to fit into any stereotypes. Stereotypes are meant to be debunked.
I totally agree, Jay. I feel like self-identity is so important at this time, especially since there is no one way to be black. You hear things from social media and even other people trying to label you when they have absolutely no business doing so.
Yes, social media plays a huge part. The best part was when Keenan said, going back and forth between one another, chameleon identity, am I me or my brother? Now those words are truly powerful.
Well, I'm sad to say that we have reached the end of our view. We hope you enjoyed it. We have shared some follow-up questions, discussion questions with your teacher to think about and to discuss. We are sharing a link also with you all to get some feedback, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. I'm Dominique Bethel.
I'm your man, Keenan Washington.
My name is Jordan Stewart.
I'm Sanaa Buford, and thank you for joining us tonight on Our View. From our AAAC family to yours, have a great night.